Good morning, everyone. Kenneth Martin here from the Hard Hat Talks podcast. I'm joined today by Mike Pratt from InverTay Homes. Welcome, Mike, to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Mike, we always get started just with a simple wee introduction from yourself, how you get involved in the industry and obviously your business. So if you want to give our viewers and listeners a wee bit more information about that.
Okay, thanks for that. So Mike Pratt, I'm actually a process engineer by background. Moved over to the UK from New Zealand in 2007. I spent most of the first years in the UK working for Scottish Water on the capital delivery program. So moving from a role from process engineering into project delivery or project management. Managed a portfolio of about 15 projects over the course of several investment periods. I did a stint with SSE as well on their major transmissions projects. That was reinforcing the networks for wind farm grid connections, that sort of thing. And then I kind of got a bit disillusioned with the whole sort of corporate side of things and decided that I needed a wee change. And it was through the armed forces where I was doing some reserve training at the time. I met my business partner, Eddie, and we spent a lot of time moaning about houses because I was in the market for a house at the time. And I was quite frankly a little bit disappointed with what was on offer for new builds at the time. I didn't want an old house, I knew that much. But I just sort of said to Eddie many times, why do you build such small rabbit hutches in the UK? And it just seemed to be this race to the bottom all the time. So I think after too many beers one night, we decided that, hey, we could do this ourselves. So we set up InverTay Homes in 2013 and started the baptism of fire, finding out about how difficult it is to get planning and building warrants and road construction consents, and then ultimately funding for that. And we managed to secure some land, brownfield site in Dundee, for our first development, which was 30 houses. We managed to secure some senior debt from RBS at the time, which I think looking back on it was quite surprising because we just had the 2009 financial crisis, and I think banks were very risk averse. They didn't want to touch anyone, particularly SME house builders. So we must have had a bit of a gift of the gab to get in there and get some money out of RBS. We did it in a phased approach. So we did the 30 houses over 3 phases. And we used a bit of private investment money as well, and that's what got us our start in life as house builders. And I guess that first 30 houses was a baptism of fire, but we learned a lot, and we also realised how volatile the whole market is. I mean, we talk about boom bust all the time in the UK and the world in terms of business confidence and cycles that happen in the global economy. But when you think back to 2015, when we first started on site, shortly after we'd had Brexit, we then had, we've had the pandemic in 2020, but we've also had a lot of real shocks to the markets in terms of lending and the effects on people being able to get or secure mortgages. Got all these mortgage affordability criteria that just got tighter and tighter. And the landscape's quite a bit different to when we started. And I would say it's a lot harder now than it was back in 2015 when we started building. So my background is nothing to do with house building, but what I do think that has been good with Eddie, my business partner, having had, I think he's now 35, 36 years in joinery and house building experience. I bring maybe the more commercial, contractual, and the project management skills. So between the two of us, we wear a lot of hats, but I think we complement each other really well. And I think we've been able to take apart some of the frustrations we have in a traditional building site and sometimes the daft things that we do, because that's the way we've always done it, and maybe tease out or question why those are being done and come up with different ways of doing it. And I guess probably the best example of that would be with Timber Engineering, which is our sister company that we set up in 2020, just before COVID happened. And that was to take offsite manufacture for on-site assembly to a new level. And we set up a new factory in Dundee, building supersized or oversized panels that were fitted out with windows, and they could be lifted into place and basically allow us to build a house, or at least erect a house, wind and watertight in less than a day. And that's been a game changer for us because we pay so much money for our finance. And if you can save a week on site, that is a massive, massive saving. So I know I've probably given you a lot of depth there in terms of what my background is and what got me into house building, but I guess our passion at the moment now is about how do we help the country out of the abysmal situation with the housing emergency. And I think there are a lot of really good ideas and a lot of people that want to put their, their shoulder to the wheel to help. But we really need engagement with local authorities and central government. And I think there's a lot of good noises happening at the moment, but there needs to be a seismic shift from where we are at the moment to where we need to be. So
yeah. I think, well, we've done a podcast recently, and one of the conversations was along the lines of, what we do on site. We work with carpenters for, biblical times. We've electricians now. We've got stonemasons or masonry. We've got all these trades, and being on site is actually maybe taking out health and safety and the fact that we've got to comply with sustainability issues now. But realistically, once the project's on site, not much has changed in terms of, being on site. The thing that's changed is the whole getting to be on site. That's become such a much more complex and probably complicated process. What's interesting there that you've mentioned that you've been in it for 10 years and you've noticed that there's a big shift and a big change in the industry as well. And for the listeners to think as well, it took you maybe 2 years when you did your first development, which was 30 units. I think you said you set the company up in 2013, but it was 2015 before you hit site. So that's a kind of 2-year period. So it does take a bit of time to get these projects on site.
It does, and I think that's the real challenge, particularly for SMEs, is that with banks and lenders being so risk averse now for development, they've got quite strong covenants that you have when you take out these development finance packages, but you've got to make up a lot of the equity. So, for example, if it's a £10 million site, the most you'll get is probably 60% loan to value. So that means you're coming up with $4 million yourself.
Yeah,
and that's a big ask, particularly that. I think like a lot of SMEs out there, we lost our shirts and socks and pants a little bit during COVID in terms of some of the contracts that we had, and there's a lot of skeletons, if you like, left over from the fallout of lockdown and contractors not being paid. I think that what they should have been paid. So now post COVID, we've got a bigger equity ask from lenders. We've got a lot more regulation and demands from local authorities, and things like developer contributions that are so, I think, disproportionate, particularly for SME house builders. And SMEs are having to put up personal guarantees. They've got their houses security. It's a really, really difficult thing to get into house building. So if you'd ask me, would I get into house building now, knowing what I know, I'd probably say no, because I'm fond of saying I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. And I think that's a real tragedy that in the middle of a housing emergency, and this is not something that's just happened in the last year because the Scottish Government decided to call it an emergency. It's been happening for 40 years in Scotland, from what I can see, the rest of the UK as well, through lots of failed different government policies that have just been anti-development or just not understanding the levers and mechanisms within the market. So there's a lot of challenges. They've got a lot harder. And I think the frustrating thing for me is that politicians, I said this to John Swinney when I met him in Dundee last year, just after he'd been made the leader, is that it's got so much harder for us to deliver. And he was actually quite surprised by that. And I said, well, give me 5 minutes of your time and a coffee, and I can tell you all the things that have happened since 2015 that have made it even harder. And, when you see funding being pulled from lots of different projects that the government's been behind before, it couldn't have been a worse time that they decided to take that funding and that reinforcement of the industry away. And I guess it's quite concerning for those of us left still in the industry.
I think the political nature of things is I kind of think, well, we'll make planning easier, and you guys will be okay, and it's a much bigger problem than that.
I think without being too condescending or too critical of politicians, I think they've got a real struggle to understand all the complexities. And let's face it, housing is not a simple solution. I think there's a lot of solutions that would help to move the needle on housing, but politicians will tend to look for the silver bullets or the easy things. And we're all aware of the law of unintended consequences. Sometimes with something that's well-intentioned, there's a knock-on effect that might actually make the outcome worse than just not having touched it to start with. And I guess one of the things I'm worried about at the moment is that we've had a lot of really good noises out of the Labor government for Westminster. They are definitely trying to be seen to help move things and push things in a better direction. But what I worry about is that it's going to result in more regulation because they've got to appoint another committee or someone else to look after these new rules that they've implemented. And before you know it, it'll be death by 1,000 cuts because you've got so many different people, all their own little agenda, their own little checkboard, ticking things off, who are not actually helping get things done. And we need everyone literally in the robot all rowing in the same direction, not all having a different idea about what's important to them, but not the people delivering.
Yeah, and we find that at the front end as well, is that it's the communications between all of these different quangos that you go, they won't even come to a meeting, they won't even pick up a phone, they just want a bit of information emailed in, and all of a sudden, a decision pops out, which might not necessarily be favourable, and it's back to the drawing board. So we're certainly finding a lot of that in our side of the process, if you know.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we've found post lockdown ending is the inability to get people to meet face to face. I mean, anytime I try and have an engagement with any local authority person or advisor to the government, it's always a Teams call, and I'm sorry, I really detest it because you don't get the same value out of a meeting. If you're going to give up your time to have a meaningful conversation, it needs to be face to face. There's so much more in communication than just words. We all know that, but I think this culture that we have now of doing everything remotely, it just doesn't work. And if we're really serious about making a change to help address the homelessness issue, which is absolutely disgraceful, and in a country of our wealth, having so many children in Scotland that are homeless is just absolutely disgraceful. And we need to say to people who are in positions to change that, you need to get behind this. If you're not in, get out of the way. That's my thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, great. So obviously the Hard Hat Talks podcast, the whole kind of mantra is to try and deliver for the viewers, and hopefully we can get some politicians and decision makers watching and starting to understand and educate for them what the overall challenge is. I think this is maybe the 10th or 11th podcast that I've recorded with various people through different professionalisms in the industry, and actually it's a lot bigger than I know. Even being involved in the industry and probably as architects, we know so much more than a lot of people in the industry would necessarily know. So the problem is actually huge. It's massive, and that will come out over the podcasts as we put them out and go forward. But for yourself, then, is there any one particular burning issue you think you'd like to talk about, and then we can maybe explore some of the solutions?
There's a lot of burning issues I've got, but I'll try and stick to one. One of the things that we're trying to do at the moment through both InverTay Homes and also through Timber Engineering UK Limited is that we are trying to help SME house builders to realise the benefits they can achieve on their developments, their small or large or medium-sized building sites, by moving to, I don't want to use the word MMC because everything's modern methods of construction these days, but moving to off-site manufacture for on-site assembly. And the reason I say that is because, like all other SMEs, we borrow lots of money to be able to go and do these developments, and that's really expensive money. And you pay a penalty for being late. The more time delays you have on a building site, the less money that ultimately you walk away from at the end of that development. And that's not us being greedy, because that money is needed to be deployed on the next development. Because, as I said before to you, there's a huge equity piece involved with development. You need to have a lot of your own money to be able to start funding the next development. And ideally, what we need to be doing is having a pipeline of land that's all in the process of getting through the planning hurdles and building consent and road construction consent, not to mention the stakeholders such as Scottish Water and the Power Board. To do that, we need to be able to make better or retain better profit in our developments. And one of the easiest ways to do that is, instead of squeezing the supply chain for every last penny out of the materials that we get, or trying to lean on our subcontractors and labour force, the best way to do that is to do things smarter, in my humble opinion, because if you can shave 2 or 3 weeks out of your program, that will save you tens of thousands of pounds over the course of your development. So what we're trying to do, and without ramming it down people's throats, is trying to produce some of the benefits, or explain the benefits of our system that we use. And those benefits only happen if all of the processes, both upstream and downstream of that activity of erecting a a house wind and watertight within a day or two, it has to be aligned. So, for example, one of the big benefits of us getting a kit up and standing and wind and watertight is that the very next day you can have internal trades such as sparkies, plumbers, joiners in there doing all the roughing, while outside you can have your brickies starting to lay the block work or the brickwork. You've got your roof tiler that can get involved. So there's a lot of concurrency. And what that does is that, let's say it takes us 16 weeks to do a house from foundation to handing the keys over. If you can knock 3 or 4 weeks out of that, that's a game changer. And that's for 2 reasons, maybe 3 actually, because one, we're saving money on the development finance interest, which is important. It helps secure your the confidence of your lender as well. If they know that the money's being turned over quicker, they're more likely to lend to you. It's really good from the point of view that you're able to do more housing per annum, which is important when we're in the middle of a housing emergency. But also something that I think you've touched on in previous podcasts is about the skills shortage. So you're able to do more with less people. Or put another way, if your labour is your constraint, then you've got the ability to overcome that at a site level by having not so much heavy reliance on the 4 weeks of joiners, for example, that you might normally take to erect a standard timber frame setup.
So I've been up to the factory. I've seen some of the processes and the system, and it is very impressive. We had conversations back then about speeding up the process, but then obviously at the end you need to rely on having the buyers to buy them as quickly as you're building them as well. And I know we've got a housing crisis, but buyers getting funding and saying, right, we're ready to go. That's one of the challenges I could imagine as well. If you're if you're building so fast, because there was a company a few years back who'd spent millions building a line, and they could rattle out many houses, but there was just no uptake on their product at that time. And they went under. Not that I think you're going to do that, but it's that thing of how is things then if the whole industry is going to start picking up and going that wee bit faster. Is there the buyers right now to come in and take them?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty, if I'm being honest. I mean, we've got burnt really badly when we had the infamous Liz Truss budget, and that instantly changed buyers' perceptions and thought, right, we'll hold off until we see the dust settle. And we had 8 houses, I think, which were all almost complete at that point, and every single one of those buyers withdrew. They lost their reservation fee, so they were happy to do that because they were so worried about the uncertainty and the economy at the time. And we were left with 8 completed houses, all fully paid for in terms of costs, but no revenue coming in. And so that to put you in our shoes just for a second, that's a situation where you suddenly have to go from being 100 miles an hour full steam ahead to, right, we're in survival mode here, because the effect on your cash flow is massive. So to answer your question, there's a lot of uncertainty even now. I mean, we've got a housing emergency, so it sounds like a bit of an oxymoron that you've never had so much demand, and yet you've got this precarious situation where you don't know that the house you're selling is going to get bought, or that you might have to do some discounting to get it shifted. And you think, well, that's crazy because our costs of construction have gone up. We're working to smaller margins than we were even 2 years ago. So everything's really, really volatile, and it's so heavily leveraged at the moment. You don't really have a lot of room to maneuver with it. So I think it makes house builders like ourselves a bit nervous about getting too carried away with construction and pushing ahead. What we really need is we need government to step in and start looking at ways that they can help and incentivize people. And I think one of the biggest tragedies we've had recently is the removal of the Help to Buy scheme, because I know there's a lot of cynics that would say that Help to Buy was a great scheme for the likes of the big national house builders who absolutely creamed it. But beneath all of that, there was also a lot of really good work that was done for helping SMEs to get certainty about sales. And if you're not having to worry that what you're building is going to be affordable or it's going to be sold at the end of it, your outlook on strategic decision making, including things like investing in apprenticeships, investing in new plant machinery, you won't do those things unless you know that you can sell a product you're building. So it's a very long answer to your question, but it's a complicated thing because the markets will do what suits the markets. And when you look at the last couple of weeks of headlines, there's been a bit of pressure being applied to the banks to say, look, we need you to loosen up your affordability criteria because we're not getting people to be able to afford houses, or they're putting off buying their first home. And I was looking at some statistics yesterday that showed that I think it was Lloyd's Bank had released some details that the average home buyer, first-time buyer in England and Wales is 32 years old. I think in Scotland it's 33 years old. So, if the affordability criteria are tough, it just means that people have to put off buying their first home.
Yeah.
And I think that's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. And also, 30-year mortgages are pretty popular as well, are coming in more for the affordability reason. So before you know it, people are not paying their houses off until they're really approaching retirement age. So it's a lot of burden to carry, as an individual to want to buy the house, but also to get to the stage of saying, I've paid it off, it's now ours. I've got £400,000 tied up doing nothing, because there's business people and entrepreneurs who think, well, we don't want our money tied up for too long, we want to get it invested. But most people who are buying houses don't think like business people or entrepreneurs, so their money's tied up, but it's taken them 30 odd years to get there.
Yeah, and that's if there's nothing that goes wrong in the meantime.
If there's nothing that goes wrong, or I need to replace windows or roofs or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem, is that when you start looking at the cost of these things, it's just that stretch too far, because you never know what's around the corner.
Yeah.
So I understand exactly why they've got affordability criteria, and you could say that there's good fiscal planning, for encouraging the right behaviours. Don't buy what you can't afford. But, a fundamental concern for anybody has to be having a roof over their heads that's safe and warm and healthy to live in.
Yeah.
And I'm aware that there's a lot of old housing stock that, if we weren't in the middle of a housing emergency, would probably have been knocked down because it's not fit for purpose. But, that's an awkward conversation to have with someone about, this house isn't the right, it's not up to standard anymore.
Yeah.
We have to knock it down because we're not replacing them quick enough.
Yeah, there is that thing of houses not being up to standard, but there's also, as architects, we see some, if you like, renovation projects that come in, looking at old buildings and renovating them. And part of NPF4 is the whole thing of let's follow sustainability criteria and let's repurpose these buildings. But, it's not easy to get them through planning either. The time you take them through the planning process, the building control process, fire, acoustics, and try and take these old buildings and upgrade fabric, that's not an easy challenge, and it's certainly an expensive challenge for any developer.
Well, I think you'll find there'll be a lot of developers now that will shy away from it because they can't make the numbers work. It's particularly bad in Scotland because I think our cost per square foot or cost per square metre is traditionally a lot lower here than it is in, say, some of the English main centres. And once you go to 3 stories or above, you're now having to fit out with fire doors. You've got all sorts of other issues around EPC certification and that. And it's all very well, it's very noble to say that we want to take these older buildings and rather than knocking them down, we're going to repurpose them, we're going to bring them up to standard. But like I keep saying, is the juice worth the squeeze? Are you going to have a house or an apartment that's going to be worth less than what you spent on it? And that is a commercial decision that everyone has to make. And I know that high streets all around the country have been absolutely decimated. And you've got a lot of old buildings that are sitting there vacant that I know local authorities are really keen for developers to go in there and turn them into accommodation, which it suits the narrative about, sort of 15-minute, to walk to work and all the rest of it. But the reality is that if you have to spend more money building or renovating that to bring it up to standard, nobody's going to touch it. And the reason we don't do renovation is because you don't really know what you're getting into until you've knocked a hole in the wall and said, oh, that's not meant to be there, or oh, that's now suddenly turned from a £5,000 job into a £25,000 job because we've got to replace lead pipe work, or we've got asbestos, or we've got any number of things. It's a really, really risky business to be in. And if you don't get the margins there to cover that risk off and have a bit of contingency, then you'd be mad to do it. So again, that's another area that I know local authorities are really keen to repurpose stock in the high street and turn it into housing, but there has to be a collaborative approach with private industry to make that feasible. So our attention really is building new build, because it's still risky, especially until you're out of the ground. But I think from a predictability point of view, you've got your sales risk, you've got weather risk, and you've got ground risk. Beyond that, it's just all the stakeholders you have to manage before you get on site.
Yeah, on site. Yeah. Well, it's probably a little. Yeah, I would say that as well. There's a bit more control that you can obtain once you're past those hurdles, as opposed to refurbishing.
Yeah, the known risks.
The known risks. Yeah. You've mentioned. I wanted to step back a wee bit. You mentioned the timber engineering company, and I know that it speeds up construction on site. We know that the timber kit construction company is speeding up construction works on site. We know that there's a great demand now from south of the border in England, what have you, for your system. I'm kind of curious that timber kit, if you follow the Facebook pages, the LinkedIn pages, in England, people think timber kit is a kind of foreign construction. It's something that's a bit, will we get a mortgage on it, etc., etc. Now in Scotland, we've been doing it for decades that I can remember. So what's your thoughts on that? How has it been received in the market? Is that a hurdles that you've overcome now? And
oh, not even close. I mean, every single developer we speak to is like an education piece to explain the benefits of it, try and dispel some of the myths. These houses are not going to spontaneously combust, or any number of things that have been thrown out there. I think there's a couple of different agendas there. So you've got some of the traditional trades, like for example bricklayers, who are a bit suspicious of it because they see themselves being done out of work, where you're replacing a masonry block wall with a timber frame, and think, well, that's not great that we're losing that. But on the two projects we did in Yorkshire, what we found is that actually once they saw the benefits to them, was they could focus more on all of the higher value bricklaying, which is the facade that goes in front of what would traditionally be their masonry block. There's now a timber frame. That's better value for them, and they can get straight onto the high value stuff, and they can turn over more of that per annum than what they would have been doing if they were bringing up the masonry course and the brick course at the same time, because it takes a lot longer to do that. So, it's difficult to tell people the benefits. Sometimes you just have to demonstrate the benefits on site. And the other one is that we have to be careful that we're not telling people too much what to do, but if people want to see and they want to exploit the benefits of our system, we were quite happy to engage with them almost with our house builder hat on to say, right, well, if we erect these ultra kit houses for you, you need to be thinking about what are the trades that need to follow, and immediately after that, how can we exploit those benefits? So, for example, in England and Wales, there's no requirement for sarking on the roofs, which we have up in Scotland. So traditionally, we would build the entire roof on the ground. We would sark it. We would put the breather membrane over the top of it. So when we have crane day, the whole roof gets lifted on last and put on top like a big lid, and then you've almost got wind and watertight straight away. Whereas in England and Wales, they do a lat and lath, and that's traditionally applied after all the timber trusses have been lifted up into place. We still build those and brace them on the ground, but we'll lift them up, and you're still looking at sky, until that lat and lath's been done, and then the roofer's got on and done all of his bits in terms of the battens and counter battens, and then the roofing tiles or slates. That's a lot of time that's wasted before you've actually got a wind and watertight house. So therefore, you're not going to be able to get the benefits of having, post crane day, a house that the joiners and sparkies and plumbers can get straight into. So it's just looking at their processes and saying, well, how do we help you to get these benefits, these tangible benefits out of it sooner, just by tweaking a few things. So for example, can you get a lat and lath on the ground when we've just done all the bracing of timber trusses? Get that on there now, and that'll be maybe 90% wind and watertight. So that allows people to start doing things such as putting the cavity insulation in the house. It's just things like that, and I guess it's a bit of an education, but it's also a bit of change. And our industry doesn't like change. We're very risk averse, and for good reason. I mean, if you look at a lot of the disasters that happen, I mean, Grenfell, I think, came about because that law of unintended consequences. Here we were on a program to try and improve energy efficiency of buildings, and everyone forgot about the most important thing, which is making sure the bloody building is safe to live in. And obviously, unfortunately, a lot of people lost their lives because of unintended consequences. And if you look at what's happened with new build, I think it was in Glasgow University back in 2015, 2012, they had done the study on new build homes not being healthy because of ventilation. So that changed the narrative very, very quickly to saying, right, well, we need to have a certain air tightness, but if it's too good, then you have to put in all this other ventilation strategy.
Yeah.
And that was born about because we had a lot of, I would say, unhealthy houses because they were too airtight. So every time we got to do something, there's sometimes an unintended consequence. And I think that's maybe some of the reasons why the house building trade or industry is a little bit averse to change. We're like, well, what's this going to do? What's the next consequence of us doing that? So you can kind of understand it. And of course, and in addition to that, we've also got to keep building standards teams happy, the inspectors have to be happy, and also the structural warranty providers who they need to be convinced you're not doing anything too I want to say too innovative, but too non-standard, shall we say it, because then you'll end up with endorsements on policies and people can't get mortgages. So that's some of the reasons why I think everyone's a bit nervous about change when it comes to house building. But we deliberately designed our system so that nothing is non-standard from a structural warranty point of view or a structural engineer's point of view. Everything's still standard materials, just built and combined in a slightly different way to maximize efficiencies.
So thinking about that, one of the Eddie's been on the podcast, your business partner, and we've had various other guests who've came along. They've talked about kind of labour and getting people in the industry. There was a post on LinkedIn, was it last night I saw it? Something like 41% of the current construction labour force will have left the industry by 2035. So, what's your views on your kit solution relative to getting people in the industry and maybe semi-skilled and how it's built, etc. How does that fit with the labour crisis that's coming as well as the housing crisis?
I'm not going to say that it's going to be a silver bullet. It's going to maybe help a little bit alleviate that normal attrition, and I would agree with that report or that statement, because so many of the really good guys we've got on site, the time served joiners and bricklayers and all that. I think the average age of a bricklayer in Scotland is like 52 years old, and no disrespect, but it's a tough gig, being a bricklayer. So traditionally that's usually been a young man's game, but it goes to show that we're not getting those young people wanting to go into a building site or learn that trade, or if they do, there seems to be barriers to that.
Actually, that was an interesting. Sorry for interrupting. That was the post I saw actually said that, and went on to say that only 3% of school children are thinking of going into the construction industry.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think on your podcast you did with Eddie, we'd just run that competition with the Tayside schools. So that was Perth, Shire, Angus, and Dundee, and that was S1 to S3s. And we got them to build eco houses, and we got some fantastic entries. I mean, really, really clever, and it's quite encouraging to see what the generation coming before us is capable of. But one thing that was really disappointing was that when we judged the finals, we had 9 teams that came in, so just under 100 kids that came in, young adults, and not a single one of them wanted to get involved in construction as a trade skill. They were more interested in things like maybe being an estate agent or being an architect or being an engineer, but no one was considering an idea of going into house building. It was like, nah, that's not for us. And these young guys and girls had come up with some amazing things. They had really good insight into what made a good eco house. Quite surprising, really, considering that a lot of that wasn't part of their normal curriculum. And the frustrating thing is that they really enjoyed the process. They enjoyed getting involved and doing the research and development, playing around with materials and things like that. But at the end of it, they didn't want to get involved in it. Now, I think it's fair to say that the average person changes their career about 5 or 6 times, or at least when I was coming out of university, that was the case. So I never set out to be a house builder. I started off as a chemical engineer and it went into doing water and wastewater treatment design and what have you. And I've kind of gravitated towards it because there are a lot of transferable skills from all industries that actually would be beneficial in house building. And it may not be everyone's first choice. But in the context of what's looming, I think it is quite troubling that we don't have enough young people who see construction as something that is rewarding, meaningful, or something that they really want to get into. And I don't know what we need to do to change it. There was another statistic that came out from HBF, the House Builders Federation, that was even more worrying, I would say, was that was it 3 or 4 weeks ago, came out saying that something like think it was either 40 or 60% of all apprenticeships, students that come through their apprenticeships leave the industry within 12 months. So this is not talking about the young guys and girls that go through their apprenticeship and fail it and then leave. We're talking about people that actually qualified and decide to leave the industry within 12 months of qualifying. I think that's a really troubling statistic. There's something endemically wrong here if that's happening. And I don't know whether it's to do with pay, whether it's to do with working conditions or working hours. But one thing we did find is that we tried the Kickstart program that came out after COVID, and that was for 16 to 24-year-olds that were unemployed, looking to try out a new job in the construction sector. So we tried employing, I think we opened it up for 10 candidates to come in. We were only able to get 4 to start, and within a week we only got down to 1. And when we interviewed these people at the end of their short tenure, they'd all said, "Oh, look, it's too many hours. We don't want to work more than 28 hours a week." And it was like, well, that's not really the way the industry works. But we're getting told more and more. I've been at a couple of leadership meetings last year where accountancy firms, law firms, other businesses, nothing to do with construction, all saying the same thing, is that we really struggle to get people to come in and work what we call office hours. And we're having to change our working hours to get people to even turn up for work, because they don't want to do a 38 or 39-hour working week. And that's a troubling thing, because we can come up with all the efficiencies on a building site, but if no one turns up, or there's two days out of 5 that they don't want to work, then we've got some pretty big problems.
Yeah, if people only want to work, I think the COVID thing has taught people that, well, is life more important than work? I get it, but it's one of those things that if you only want to work 20 hours a week, do they want to do that and still earn the salary for the 35 hours or the 37.5 hours?
Of course.
So that would be a great world if we could all live in it.
Well, I think that it helps explain why the country's GDP has plummeted. Our productivity per capita has plummeted since COVID. And I think it's been a cultural swing towards now, as you call it, a better work-life balance. But if productivity drops, then we're all going to pay the price for it. And I think that's where house building has been a very good barometer for that, because we can see that if you don't have people working on the tools on your site, I mean, you can't work from home building a house, unfortunately. If you don't have those people on the site, then there's going to be a drop in productivity. And that ultimately will lead to increases in costs, because all of our prelims that we have on a building site, such as the welfare, the power, all the things that you have on a daily basis, whether you're building or not, they're still going on. Your costs of finance are still accruing. But if it's taking longer to build the same house, it's going to cost more money. And this is at a time when there's a cost of living crisis. So things are becoming even more expensive, but not for good reasons. I would say it's because that we're becoming, I'm not saying lazier, but less productive.
I think I was watching something. I do a lot of social media stuff. There was a let's just say an older gentleman on the TV who said there is no cost of living crisis. He was talking to a young interviewer, walked up to him in the street with a microphone, tell us about, and he's like, there's no a cost of living crisis. The challenge is you're standing in front of me with your Nike trainers on, your designer gear, this, that. It's how you choose to spend your money that's caused the crisis, is what he was trying to say. So I thought it was an interesting take. I get there is people out there who are struggling 100%, but there is a lot of people, I think, when you talk about, I only want to work 20 hours a day, they want to work 20 hours, a week. 20 hours a week, but they also want to go and get the coffees, they want to do the Just Eats, they want the nice trainers, they want the latest phones. So it's the two don't really go hand in hand as well.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. And I certainly don't want to, say that everyone's in that boat. I think there's a lot of people that are genuinely struggling out there. And I was listening to the Go Radio show a couple of weeks ago, and Lord Willie Hawkey was talking about no one has any disposable income anymore. When you look at the 60% of the population that pays, most of the taxes, and someone on 50 grand, like I think he was given the example of a young single mother who was on 50 grand a year salary, but between her nursery fees and her mortgage, she didn't have a single penny to her name. She said that there is no disposable income. She said, I'm on 50 grand a year and I don't have enough money to know that I can pay my power bill at the end of the month and all these sorts of things. So yes, there's a lot of people out there that have got income, disposable income they deploy maybe in a less pragmatic way, but there are a huge section of society now that 10 years ago they wouldn't have been classified as struggling, they wouldn't have had to think about the direct debit coming out this month for the power or for the gas or the phone bill. They now are worrying about it, and that's concerning because salaries and wages haven't increased in line with all of these cost increases we've had. So I know we're a little bit off topic, but those things, they all matter. And if we're looking at things like housing, which is a fundamental human right to be able to have a safe roof over your head, and that is now becoming less and less affordable. And I'm not even talking about just buying a house, I'm talking about renting one. Have you seen what's happened in Scotland with these, I would argue, disastrous policies about the rent caps, and what that's done is that actually it's made it more expensive for rental. It's had the exact opposite effect. And that new baseline is now considerably higher than it was before those policies were put in place. We're never going to go back. So it's only going to go up in cost. And the house building's the same as well, is that through all these different things in terms of building materials, labor crisis and labor costs going up and everything going up, it's making it less and less attainable for people to be able to strive to earn the money to be able to have a house of their own. And I think it's a tragedy. But the government needs to do something, I think, to help that. To I'm not saying give freebies. I don't think that's right either. If you want something, you have to work for it. But you have to know that if you put the hard work in, you got a second job or whatever it might be, whatever you do to save that money, that you're not on a treadmill where you're never going to reach your end goal. You've got to know that it's actually attainable. And I think there's a lot of young people out there now that have given up on it. And I think it's a crying shame, because, when you think about what is prosperity, what is about having a comfortable life, if you've got a house, that gives you security, it gives you certainty. It's a place for your kids to grow up. And I put this to John Swinney when I met him in Dundee last year, is that he was proud of the early education policy that the SNP's brought in, and what benefits that brought to young people by having that early childcare. And I said, well, do you really think that's going to make any difference if they don't have a permanent house? They're moving from one house to the next over a school year or whatever it might be. That's an intrinsic requirement for people to do well, to have that security of where they live, whether it's a rental property, whether it's a house that their parents own. That'll do more, I think, for child development and learning outcomes than what subsidising early childcare will. In my humble opinion.
Well, I think you're right, and I think that just goes to show the level of thought that both yourself and Eddie put into. It's not just about building houses, but the purpose, the reason, the why for building houses, and think about the whole social context and the problem we're trying to resolve. And I wonder maybe if some of the larger house builders actually do think about that, or if maybe they do, but maybe they're just pushing for more houses, more volume. But you guys seem to have a more intrinsic human understanding, in my opinion, about why you're doing what you're doing.
But we are a company that has to make a profit, but one of the things that we want to do with that is to be able to reinvest it and create pipelines of, housing developments. And I don't even like using the word developments, because it seemed a little bit it's not personal, but building communities, because, we've got a lot of real socio-economic challenges at the moment. And, if we can try and help get people into their own home that's warm and safe and it's affordable, not just to buy, but also to live in, that will have really good outcomes for those people that can get into that. And I know there's a real focus at the moment on building socially affordable houses, for rent, social housing. But I think we've got to stand back from this and realise that it's not just about focusing on one group and saying, right, we're going to build lots of social houses, because there's going to be, every time someone buys a house and they leave that socially rented house to move up the ladder, that frees that house up. So we can't just focus on one group and build only social houses. I think what we need to do is say, well, we do need houses for all different walks of life. I think we've got another crisis coming up in the next 20 years, which is older people that are living in ex-council houses they bought under the right to buy that aren't fit for purpose for them, where they're starting having disabilities, or they've not got the same accessibility, and they can't use the stairs, and those older houses are not designed or capable of being made adaptive for their needs. They're going to need to move into something that's not a care home, but maybe something like a bungalow, which we don't build anymore, that's more suited for their needs. But again, there's an opportunity there. If we can take those houses buy them back into council stock or whoever's going to take those on. They get retrofitted if it's financially feasible to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That would then free those houses up for all walks of life, whether it's asylum seekers, whether it's people that need social housing immediately. Then those could be made available, I think, in a quick turnaround time. But we'd be building new housing stock as well, and that's something I think we need to be clear-eyed about. Is don't just focus on one category. You've got people with twilight is downsizing. You've got people that have got varying needs. You've got people that have moved to Scotland because they want a better life, but they're in a high tax category, which is what Scotland needs. We need more tax receipts. I think you'll hear the government officials agree with that. But they're not going to want to live in a socially rented home. And why should they? Because they're taking that away from someone that actually needs it. So we need more new build homes as well that are tailored for different walks of life. People that are maybe a bit more prosperous, but they're not going to want to or need to live in a socially rented home. So from my opinion, I think it's important that we don't just focus on one category of housing.
Well, we've had conversations in here with previous guests as well about like the building we're in is an office building, and there's plenty of these. There's, a few hundred yards away, there's 4 or 5 of these sitting empty, and have done since they were built. But buildings like that, you could in theory say, right, well, they're not ideal for housing, they aren't, but they could be converted into 1 or 2 bedroom flats. They might not have dual aspect flats, they might be single aspect, etc. But if we can get planners and those involved to understand that they're a stepping gap, they're an opportunity to get people in somewhere that's nice and warm, it doesn't leak, there's no dampness, there's no mould, but we're only anticipating they're going to be in there for a year or 2 until such times as the housing stock's free, it's upgraded, we've got new house building going. But it seems to me as if there's, as a designer facing the planning departments at the front end, there seems to be this kind of utopian ideal that gets rolled out every other year. This is the ideal scenario for housing. But then it seems to forget about, well, there's other buildings and opportunities and sites out there that could be developed that can help to fix a problem. But yeah, it's maybe not the ideal solution, but what's wrong with putting a nice warm roof over someone's head until we get to the next bit, So we've had those conversations as well. So it's a huge problem, and I think part of what you've done today is probably just reframed that for the listeners, and thanks for doing that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Fantastic. Got a wee quick question for you. Wee quick question left by our previous guest, and it's actually an easy one. Who's been your biggest influence in life?
Oh, that's a difficult one, actually, to be honest.
All right.
That's probably the hardest question I've been asked all week. I guess my father had quite an influence on me in terms of instilling a really strong work ethic at a young age. I worked for my father during my holiday breaks. He had a manufacturing business and was really supportive of me going off and doing a degree and going out there to change the world. So he's been really good from an early age in terms of instilling that work discipline and work ethic, and really reinforcing the concept that if you want something, you have to work for it.
Excellent, fantastic. We always finish off the podcast with a wee question for the next guest. I know you don't know who that's going to be, but have you got something you'd like to ask the next guest?
Okay, so maybe if you could change one thing about the industry right now, what would it be and why?
What would be and why? Fantastic. Mike, I've thoroughly enjoyed your time on the podcast. Thank you for coming along. I'm sure we'll get you along at some point again in the future, either yourself or Eddie. But until then, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Hard Hat Talks. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. That way, you'll be sure to never miss an episode. If you've got any feedback or a topic you want us to tackle, please drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Till next time, stay safe, stay sharp, and keep your hard hat on.